For 30 years, the Chinese regime has been trying to destroy America from the inside using a little-known strategy.
The Wang Huning's philosophy, America against America. So they use American media, they use the freedom of speech here, they use the justice system.
Today I sit down with author, historian, and popular China affairs commentator Tianliang Zhang.
If there is a war between China and the United States, we need to buy our weapons from our enemy. So, this is really, really scary to think about it.
His new film, China's Stealth Invasion, reveals how the Chinese Communist Party exploits democratic values and institutions against American interests.
They talk about free market because that's the value you treasure, that's the value you feel like is not disputable. And you have to follow the rule. But actually, they are not following the rules. So they are using your rules and to take advantage of you.
One useful case study of this strategy in action is the CCP's transnational campaign against the Falun Gong community in America. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Professor Tianliang Zhang, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Thanks for having me.
Recently, President Trump gave a speech about the 2020 election, about interference, published a series of documents that have been declassified and others. One of those packages focuses specifically on the Chinese Communist Party's efforts. What do we know about how the Chinese Communist Party was involved in all this?
I think it's not surprising at all. I guess back to 1998, so we have already known that Chinese military were spending money try to influence or to support a specific candidate. And I guess that pattern just continued all the way up to here, up to now. The most surprising thing to me is that they have already stolen 220 million voters' information from us. So I think this is a very, very serious national security issue. I remember that the federal government wants to collect all the voter information from different states, and they said we won't give you because we don't want it to be concentrated into one place and then it will be breached and somebody will steal that. But actually it happened. Actually China has already had that. And also I read some news, probably unverified. They said that Chinese people, they have manufactured a lot of driver's license, fake driver's license, and then ship it to America and then register them as voters. So I think this is very, very alarming.
The bottom line, when you look through these documents around the Chinese Communist Party's role, what facts come out? Because there's a lot of discussion about this. It's kind of a mess. Even around this issue of the 220 million voter records, you hear there's some media that are saying, oh, that's not a big deal. Those are available, right? So what is it that these documents showed?
I think we can see clear intention that CCP wants to understand the voters, their partisan choice. And also I think they are trying to look into their data and then see how they can manipulate their idea. I think nowadays with all this information on these social media platforms, it's very easy to target a specific person and tailor the information that he can see, and so that his opinion can be swayed. I think I have seen some kind of experiment. They try to manipulate about voters' opinion in the election in India. They did find it's very, very effective. So, and then people were manipulated without knowing. And I think with all the data and also with the platform the CCP controls, like the TikTok, and also I believe they also heavily infiltrate into other social platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and they can change people's mind to vote the candidates that CCP favor.
Well, one of the things that I did notice was that there were a number of documents saying that the Chinese Communist Party really didn't want President Trump reelected.
Yeah, that's obvious. So probably CCP believe in that Biden is probably more easily manipulated and probably in their pocket. They know that President Trump is very, very tough on CCP, especially he started this tariff war or like the trade war with China. That never happened before Trump era. So I think CCP was kind of scared. And also the Secretary Pompeo was also very, very tough to CCP. So I guess CCP was afraid that, you know, if Trump has the second term and with Mike Pompeo, CCP will be in a very, very hard position.
Well, the new Secretary of State is also, I mean, actually sanctioned technically. This is actually, there's a kind of this interesting change in the language. Maybe you can remind us actually, because the exact nature of this, but for Secretary Rubio to go to China, they actually altered the characters in his name. Can you explain that?
Yeah, that's very interesting because Marco Rubio, I guess CCP never imagine that the second term of the Trump administration, they have an even tougher state secretary. Marco Rubio, actually, you know, he was sanctioned twice. The first time was on the Hong Kong issue, and then the second time was on the Xinjiang issue. He was sanctioned twice, and he was not supposed to go to China, not allowed. And then because he is now the state secretary and they have to allow him in, and then they change his translation of his name. You know, same pronunciation, but they change the Chinese character. So this is a very subtle change. People really, you know, laugh about that.
So this is a bit into your expertise. They laugh about it, but like, it just seems like it's not needed, right? Like they're letting him in. Like, why would they do this? And explain to us the mentality here.
Just to save their face, you know. So they feel like they have to allow him in, but like, what will do? So you want to repeal the sanction, or like you want to maintain there? Because if you repeal the sanction, it means like
you were wrong.
You are surrendering, and they don't want to give people such impression. So they just change his translation. His name, you know, translation subtly.
It's just, it's like basically you're saying it's the most neutral way, it's the most face-saving thing they could do, or something.
Yeah, yeah. It's very awkward, so I have to say, and people can see that, but like they still do that. You know, sometimes the CCP will do something that looks very, very stupid, but they do it nonetheless. So you can see like Xi Jinping, a lot of people mocked him, you know, as like, because his actual diploma is like just a graduate from an elementary school. But meanwhile, he's holding a PhD degree from Tsinghua University. So, but from what he said, you know, in public speech, for many times, he read the Chinese characters with the wrong pronunciation. And it seems like he was not very well educated. But on the other hand, you can see he published tens, maybe dozens of books of his thoughts. And he can get his PhD when he was working, you know, as a busy, very, very busy position, but he can still get this PhD. So you can see that, you know, that this is an obvious academic corruption, but he still do that. I remember that he went to Russia, he went to France, and some other countries, and he gave a speech by just reading a list of books he has ever read. This is a long, long list. So people just mocked him. So,
but he did it nonetheless.
Yeah.
And so because, why?
I think he did it just because his secretary gave the list, gave the speech to him. I don't think he even read it before the speech. He just read it. So sometimes when you see his speech, and probably it's also AI made, but they just mark some difficult Chinese characters with a different Chinese character, but with the same pronunciation, you know. And then when he read it, they make sure that he doesn't read it wrong.
Fascinating. You introduced me to the book America Against America. And of course, this is featured in your new film. But tell me, what is America Against America? What is it? When did it come out? And how does it relate to this election interference you've been discussing?
Okay, so this book was authored by Wang Huning, who is the mastermind behind the 3 generations of CCP leaders, from Jiang Zemin to Hu Jintao and to Wang Huning. He basically came up with like 3-step strategy. The first step was during the Jiang Zemin era. At that time, it was right after the all those Tiananmen massacre and also all those sanctions. So CCP was very weak, and then has a very negative view all over the world. At that time, so the basic idea is to hide your strength and buy your time. So,
right, Deng Xiaoping's kind of maxim, right?
Right, yeah. After the Tiananmen massacre, so we see like the Cold War finished, Berlin Wall was torn down and also Soviet Union was dissolved. And CCP's idea, because at that time they were both very weak militarily and economically, and they want to make friends. So when you see like whenever CCP is very, very, very weak, they're trying to make friends. I remember in 1939, so the CCP published a book called a Communist. And the opening remark was given by Mao Zedong, by Mao. And Mao said, we had 3 magical weapons. The first one is the party building, so basically to build solidarity. And then the second one was armed struggle, means like we will never give up violence. And the third one is called the United Front work. So because CCP was very weak at that time, and they always say like America is our best friend and we admire what Americans have achieved, and we really like their system. We really like democracy, and they published a lot of articles at that time promoting democracy, praising America. So they did it for like 10 years, from 1939 to 1949, in their official, like the mouthpiece of the Chinese Communist Party. And interestingly, like in 1999. 50 years after CCP became, the ruling party of the country, and the people found, dig out all those articles and republished that, and they called it like the pioneer voice or the pilot voice of the history. So basically, they republished what CCP published 50 years ago, but then that book was immediately banned. So from that story, you can tell like whatever CCP said, it doesn't count, So even they signed the joint statement with the UK about Hong Kong's status. They talk about one country, two system, but like in 2020, and they passed the so-called the national security law, and then they said, okay, so the statement we signed with UK now is a document in the history, so basically it doesn't count. So basically, when CCP is very, very weak and they try to make itself look good in other people's eyes, and they try to make friends, and they try to, like capture some elites to support them. So this is called the United Front work. And this is also exactly the strategy Wang Huning invented, for Jiang Zemin. They call it 3 represents. I don't know whether you heard of that. It means like you're trying to making friends with everybody, like a capitalist with like a foreign governments. You try to make friends with everyone. And then when Hu Jintao became the leader of CCP, that was in 2002. A very, very important thing happened the year before. That was 2001, and China joined the WTO. And suddenly all the tariff barrier was removed, and then CCP became the powerhouse, became the powerhouse of the manufacturers. So basically, they can produce all those very cheap stuff and then flood into other country, and then basically destroyed other countries' factories and also jobs. So this is the second phase. And Wang Huning called it scientific development. It means like we are developing our country in a scientific way. And then after 10 years, it came to 2012, and then Xi Jinping became the leader of the CCP. And at that time, Xi Jinping felt like we are strong enough, so we don't need to hide our strengths. And now we can openly tell the world that we will be the dominant force of the world. So basically, he talked about the community of shared future of humanities. So he means like we need to change the international or like the world order. which was established by the United States after World War II. And now CCP want to be at least the peer force, like peer power of America. And, by achieving this, you can see like Wang Huning has been using the idea like America against America, because like during the first phase, and we are using the so-called like the free market, and we use like the diplomacy to buy the time. But basically, when you talk about the free market, it seems like nobody here will be against that, right? But then they are actually not free market, because the CCP was stealing intellectual properties, and CCP was like polluting the environment, and so they used kind of the national allowance to give it to all those factories, all those research centers to develop their own product, and then dump it into other countries. When you look at a very specific example, is like Huawei, So Huawei used to be very, very weak, but then we say, oh, we have such a large country, we have such a large population. So Nortel, if you want to enter China, and then you have to give us your technology. And then
Nortel was a Canadian company famously that died.
It's like AT&T. So and then they enter China, and Huawei reverse engineered their technology, and then they start to build their the routers and the switches, and with the allowance from the government, and then they can sell it very, very cheap.
Subsidy, like by allowance you mean subsidy from the government, right?
Yeah, kind of subsidy, yes. Yeah. With the subsidy of the government, and then they can sell it at a very, very cheap price. Nobody can compete with them. Like it's a half price, it's a third price, and they can even give you for free for a few years, and then you can pay me back later. So basically, they finance the product for you, and then nobody can compete. And then Nortel just died. It disappeared. I guess this is just an example. So this pattern is repeated all over the place. So by doing this, when you talk. Superficially, it looks like a free market, but actually it's not. But they talk about the free market because that's the value you treasure. That's the value you feel like is not disputable, and you have to follow the rule. But actually, they are not following the rules. So that's the problem. So they are using your rules, and to take advantage of you.
And so explain to me how America against America fits into what President Trump recently talked about.
For example, the election. So Trump talked about the election. I guess this is a very, very hot topic and even probably controversial. But I want to bring up a story. There was a very famous Chinese scholar called Jin Canrong. From time to time, he entered Zhongnanhai to give lecture to those top leaders of CCP. And then he openly said that there are 435 congressional districts. And if we can have our manufacturers, enterprises in every district, and if we are large enough, then we have enough money to support like a certain candidate, right? And then if we have like Chinese community large enough, then we can sway probably thousands of votes. And usually, in our election, the number of votes are very, very close. So 1,000 votes, 2,000 votes can make a great difference. And he said, in that way, nobody will dare to stand against us or to stand against the CCP. And then he said that we can turn the US Congress into China's National People's Congress. So it means like every congressman, every senate is working for CCP. So this is really, really scary. So when Jin Canrong said that openly, he said we. So we don't know, he means like we as Chinese scholars or we as CCP. This is vague, but like what he said is really, really alarming, I guess, because they're abusing our election systems to put their like figurehead or somebody they can control in the place.
Well, maybe just to get you to comment on this briefly, there's been all sorts of examples of the Chinese Communist Party capturing politicians or getting people work on their behalf in different ways. And this happens actually not just at the federal level, but at the state level and the municipal level. And
right. It's a long-term plan. So you can see that take the Congressman Swalwell as an example. So when he was very, very young, when he was like an entry-level politician, and then Chinese government has already identified him, and then someone approached him and provided him with like kind of honeypot, you know. So I guess this is really, really common because like in our society, usually an official is elected and then he takes the office and stay there for 8 years. And then he's finished and he's moving on to something else. But like for Chinese government, they can plan for like 40 years and they can carry it out step by step. So as I said, like Wang Huning, he came here in 1989 or 1988 as like a J1, like an exchange scholar. And he stayed here for about half a year and he observed this society. He found like there's something he can make use of, like so-called free market, democracy, freedom of speech, the independence of like justice system. They feel there are a lot of things that they can make use of. For example, in 2022, Xi Jinping held a meeting, a very high-level meeting with Public Security Ministry, and also some other like intelligence people. And he said, our war against Falun Gong outside is like a total failure in the past. So we have to have something new. And then they decided to launch war against the Falun Gong in two fronts. One front is the legal front, and the other one is the media front. So basically, in this case, they are using the freedom of speech, so-called freedom of speech, to demonize Falun Gong by using American media. And also because in America, everybody can sue everybody. So they can sue you, and then probably they know they will lose, but then they really burden you with like a very high attorney cost. For example, you know, the headquarters of Shenyun Performing Arts is called Dragon Springs. And there was a guy who lived in Tianjin for 15 years. And then he came back. He's a white guy. He stayed in China for 15 years. And then he came back to America. And then he opened up a nonprofit organization near where the Dragon Springs is. And then the only thing he did, or his nonprofit organization, is to sue Dragon Springs in the name of violation of environmental preservation law, whatever. So he sued 4 times. And every time, you know, the Dragon Springs has to respond. And then they had to hire an attorney. So like with all these lawsuits, then they can easily spend $1 million. And every time he failed, but then he brought up the same lawsuit again. So you can see that, you know, this is the pattern. You know, they don't have to win, but they harass you, and they
kind of like wear you down, right? Financially.
Yeah.
I mean, there's also reputational damage,
yes,
right?
Yes. So that's exactly what happened on Shenyun Performing Arts. So they sue you, and then they publish on the media saying like they are being sued, they are being investigated, but actually, they just not only doing that, they spread all these information to all those theaters, all those venues, all those presenters, and try to scare them so that, you know, to make it hard for you to sell tickets.
So we've covered Shenyun and the, you know, these various hit pieces against Shenyun, some lawsuits and so forth on this show before. But very briefly, for those that might not be familiar, you know, Falun Gong, ancient Chinese spiritual discipline. Why is the Chinese Communist Party, give me kind of a deeper picture, why is the Chinese Communist Party so particularly obsessed with this group?
I think one of the reasons, or the most important reason, I believe, that CCP persecuted Falun Gong was because the teaching of Falun Gong is truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. And these 3 values are directly opposite of CCP ideology. So, for example, the number 2 guy, who is actually the assistant of Mao, he said, if you don't lie, you cannot achieve anything. So basically, that's like what CCP believe. So you can see like in CCP propaganda is full of lies. Like they openly claim like they didn't kill anybody during the Tiananmen massacre. Nobody died in Tiananmen area. That kind of thing is open lies. And then they have already done so many things, so bad things in the history, and they want to cover it up. For example, the Great Famine, like
the Great Leap Forward.
Yeah, the Great Leap Forward and the famine that ensued. So like 30 to 40 million people just died of starvation. So if people just to tell the truth, and CCP is finished. So that's why, you know, the first principle of Falun Gong, truthfulness, this is what CCP is afraid of most. And the second principle of Falun Gong is compassion. But CCP talk about class struggle, right? They promote hatred. I remember that the very famous philosopher Russell, he talked about Karl Marx. He said the Marxism is quite evil, because if you want to make people happy, and then your principle or your philosophy should be based on kindness and love, so that you know you can make people happy. But the foundation of Marxism is hatred. So basically, they hate successful people. They hate people who are wealthy, and they hate people with like a good reputation, and they just want to destroy them. So that is, you know, directly against the compassion, the second principle of Falun Gong. And the third principle Falun Gong promoted is called tolerance. And you know, again, CCP talk about violence. You know, they always trying to use violence to achieve their goals. They will arrest all the dissidents. You know, they will gun down all those students in Tiananmen Square. So they always use violence. So that's directly against the tolerance. So I think like CCP found that if everybody in China believe in Falun Gong, and then their teaching, their philosophy will be just abandoned. You know, they will be deserted by the people. So, but you need to understand that the CCP is a party built on an ideology. So if the ideology foundation is gone, and then the party will collapse. So that was Jiang Zemin, I think like in 1999, he wrote a letter to the Politburo. He gave two reasons why he cracked down Falun Gong. This was published in 2006 in China. He gave two reasons why he persecuted Falun Gong. The first one is the number of followers of Falun Gong are too many. And the second reason was like they believe in something other than communism. So that's the real reason. And after the persecution started and Falun Gong group resisted it peacefully, I guess this is also what CCP was very afraid of, because like in history, they can crack down anybody, any group, including like the president of China, Liu Shaoqi. He was persecuted to death. And like even there are million people like went to Tiananmen Square to protest after they used the machine gun to dispel people. And then, you know, you don't see any mass gathering again. You don't see any.
They sent the message.
Yeah. You don't see any resistance like in large group. Right. But Falun Gong is very, very different, because Falun Gong is like a more or less kind of spiritual practice of each individual. So you cannot take it out of people's heart. And then this is the first time in CCP history, and they saw this kind of resistance from grassroots in large scale, and like with this perseverance, even when they face tortures, you know, killing. You wrote the book Kill to Order, right? Even when their organs were harvested, but people still were very, very adamant. You know, people still follow this teaching. So that was CCP was very afraid of. And another thing is like, you saw a lot of democratic leaders during the Tiananmen movement, right? Before the Tiananmen massacre. And then the CCP strategy is just to exile them, you know, put them in other countries. When they are in other countries and they lose the connection with the Chinese people, their voice is not heard. So all these leaders of the movements are no longer a threat. But Falun Gong is different. You know, I think like the first day when Falun Gong was persecuted, the Falun Gong practitioners established the websites and start to use emails, and you know, in chat room, people start to tell people, what was going on. All these overseas Falun Gong practitioners, they were doing this. We called it clarifying the truth. And then, okay, so then CCP see not only the resistance from China, inside China, but also outside China, and they're like bound together. So very tightly. So I guess CCP sees it as really as number one threat in its history. So, and therefore they need to have something new, really like a new strategy to deal with this. And this is the transnational, we call it transnational repression. And the problem is, like I mentioned this because the way they use is really the Wang Huning's philosophy, America against America. So they use American media, they use the freedom of speech here, they use the justice system here to persecute Falun Gong. I think like there's a very well-known case, a guy called Zhang, right? He tried to bribe IRS agent and just to repeal Shenyun Performing Arts nonprofit organization status. And then actually the FBI found his scheme, and then FBI agent impersonate the IRS agent and answer his call. And then this Zhang Chen was caught and he was convicted. So you can see that they are using IRS, they are using DOJ, and they are using the media. Actually, they are using the Department of Labor in New York State and open an investigation on Shenyun, the Department of Labor, the FBI. So you can see they use all these United States institutions as their tool, to investigate a U.S. individual or U.S. enterprise. So this is, I think, a very a typical case of America against America, how it is implemented here on the soil of the United States.
Tell me a little bit about your background, because there's we even have a staff member here. Actually, one of the interns here was telling me that he watches your show regularly, right, on YouTube, very popular in Chinese, of course. I'll tell everyone. But tell me a little bit about your background. Of course, you're a professor at Feitian College, but yeah.
I want to say that I was born in China. So I grew up in northeast China. My father was a graduate from a college in 1963, but because his father, my grandpa, was kind of in CCP's class struggle theory, is their enemy. So, and then my father, after graduation, he went to a small city in northeast China, and then my mother, her father was an enterprise, and they were very wealthy. And then when CCP came and they found out that they had a lot of money, and then they started to pressure their accountant, and then to convict my grandpa, saying like they were didn't pay tax, and then just confiscate their all the belongings. And then my grandpa was very angry, and then he went to the government and to argue, and then he was put in labor camp for 3 years, and he was also put in labor camp in northeast China. That's where my father and my mother met, and they married there in 1970, and I was born in 1973. So because at that time, China was still not open, and we can only receive information from the government, from the textbook. So actually, I believe that CCP is a great party, and they are working hard for the benefit of the people. And then in 1989, when I was 16 years old, the Tiananmen massacre happened, right? It happened in Beijing. At that time, I was like the 12th grader. I was kind of upset by the government. And in that year, I went to Beijing. I became a freshman. For the first 2 weeks, there's no academic courses. The first 2 weeks is for brainwashing. So basically, for the 2 weeks, CCP gave you all those videos or their version of narrative, and to try to tell us that those are rioters, they are disturbing the social order, they're creating troubles for people. And then that's why it is justified for the government to use force to crack it down. So after weeks of brainwashing, I was totally convinced. I had to say that. I think their propaganda is very, very powerful. If you only receive their information, you're